Last week, I had the opportunity to take a little bit of vacation time, and I traveled up to the Seattle area and just kind of got away and had some time alone, which was very nice. And while I was there, I decided to kind of spend one day doing some sightseeing around Seattle. And one of the things on my bucket list, you could say, is to go to a baseball game at all of the different Major League Baseball stadiums. And so I decided to go to see a Mariners game. And as I was standing there outside the stadium in line, waiting to get into the stadium, there were a group of men. There were probably maybe 5 or 6 of them at different areas around the stadium with big loudspeakers and microphones, and they were preaching to those people who were standing in line. And I'm sure we've all seen people like this before at various things, right? People who were standing outside preaching and telling people about Jesus and trying to convince us, right, to give ourselves over and to give our lives to Jesus. And that kind of thing takes a lot of courage, right, to speak so boldly in the name of Christ, to preach the gospel to people who, by and large, rejected them, right, laughed at them, ignored them, all of those things, right? But the thing that jumped out at me was the message that they were proclaiming. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about ever since I was standing there in line hearing what they were saying. There was one of the men in particular who was preaching a very particular message. And what he said was this. He said, "Life is terrible. Life is horrible. And I want to get drunk, and I want to smoke weed, and I want to give in, basically, to all of the carnal pleasures that are offered to escape all of the sufferings of life. But I love Jesus, and Jesus says that I can't, and so I don't. And so life goes on, and it's bad. And then at some point, I'll die, and because I obeyed Jesus and followed his commands, I'll get to go to heaven, and all of my sufferings will be gone." I don't know about you, but that doesn't seem to me a particularly effective way to preach the gospel. And in fact, I think that message, that I think a lot of times we can kind of fall into that same kind of line of thinking, goes, in a sense, directly contrary to what Jesus says. Particularly in today's gospel, there's a very powerful message from the Lord. He's inviting his disciples into this relationship of love, right? "Remain in my love," he says. "If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love." So he's inviting us to give ourselves to him, right? To give ourselves to him in love and to follow his commandments. And then he gives a very important clarification for us. He says, "I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy might be complete." Jesus is very clear that he's not just offering a life of drudgery until one day we die and then our sufferings can end. Now, Jesus is very clear also elsewhere in the Gospels that the Christian life does include suffering. He says, unless you take up your cross and follow me daily, you cannot be my disciple. Just the other day in our gospel, yesterday morning at daily mass, he says, if they persecuted me, they'll persecute you. If they hated me, they'll hate you. So he is very clear that there will be suffering in this life. But the beautiful thing about what Christ came to do is that he came so that our sufferings can now be united to his suffering. And that very thing that would cause us so much distress and so much sorrow and so much sadness can now be a way of entering into a relationship with him. And it can bring us fulfillment, and it can bring us true happiness and true joy, the kind that the world cannot offer. The reality is that when we enter into a relationship of love with Jesus, we don't need to escape the sufferings of this life. We can embrace them because in them we are united more closely with the one that our hearts truly desire. And there's another very important dimension to this exchange of love that we're invited into. And it's that the primary movement of love, the first movement of love, and the most important movement of love is not our movement of love toward the Lord, but the Lord's movement of love toward us. St. John clarifies this very beautifully and very powerfully and very simply and directly in our second reading today. In this is love, he says, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as expiation for our sins. This is the primary act of love. Right here on the altar, when Jesus gives himself to us completely, when he lays down his life for us and gives us himself totally, fully, body, blood, soul, and divinity in this sacrament that we receive. Here in the Mass, Jesus lays down his life completely for each and every one of us. And when we respond to that love, we are participating in that act of love. But I want to be very clear that your response to God's love is not a condition of God's love. I'll say that one more time in case you didn't get it. Your response to God's love is not a condition of God's love. When we choose in our freedom to sin, when we choose in our freedom to reject the love that God offers us, he still loves us. He meets us in our sin, and he pours out his love to us regardless of what we choose to do with that love. It's our freedom. We can choose to receive that love and to accept it and to cooperate with it and to respond to it and to be transformed by it and to be made holy by it. But it's his love that does all of those things. It's his love that saves us. It's his love that makes us holy. It's his love that brings us to heaven. So today in our celebration of the Eucharist, as we offer this sacrifice, we give thanks to God for that primary act of love. We give thanks that he would lay down his life for us, that he would give himself to us fully in the Eucharist. And we ask that we would be given the grace to receive that love with love in kind, that we would cooperate with his grace so that his joy may be in us and our joy may be complete.